Thank you and welcome to the Cose Web Ed webinar. Today's topic is the rise of the bots, what you need to know, and will be presented by Ryan Gomes. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to go over a few housekeeping items. My name is Marissa and I will be the webinar organizer for today. We want to make sure today's presentation is extremely valuable for you, so we ask that you submit all questions by clicking on the question button in the control panel and typing your question. Your questions are only visible to me, and I will collect all submitted questions and do the question and answer with Ryan at the end of his presentation. Now for the main event, I would like to introduce Ryan Gomes. Ryan Gomes is the Director of Product at Robots and Pencils, where he helps to create delightful and engaging experiences through technology for clients across industries. Robots and Pencils is a digital innovation agency that helps its clients use frontier technology, mobile and web to create what's new. Without further ado, I will now hand it over to Ryan Gomes.
Thanks, Marissa. Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending today's session, Rise of the Bots, What You Need to Know, and thank you to Greater Cleveland Partnership for offering me the opportunity to speak to you today about a topic I'm super passionate about, bots. So as Marissa said, my name is Ryan Gomes, and although the title on my business card and LinkedIn does read Director of Product Design, I'm a pencil here at Robots and Pencils, because here at Robots and Pencils, we believe that everything we do starts by blending the sciences with the humanities, the robots with the pencils, and the programmers with the designers. So here at Robots and Pencils, we call our developers robots, we call our designers pencils, and all of the folks that help support us, from our business analysts to our product managers, we call them ampersands. As Marissa said, Robots and Pencils is a digital innovation agency, and here's just some of the areas that we like to play. But today I'm here to talk to you about why we believe bots are super relevant right now by sharing some stats and predictions. I'm going to share some examples of some bots across a variety of verticals like retail, travel, customer support, and my personal favorite, education. I'll cover just a bit of design and strategy concepts to get you thinking about what steps are needed to create really engaging bots. And I'll make a couple of quick suggestions of how to focus on maybe a meaningful way to start your bot strategy. I'll offer an example of how to make the case within your org, and hopefully I'll leave plenty of time to answer your questions at the end. So with that, why don't we dive in? So why bots? Why now? I think a good place to start is to ask ourselves what the heck a chatbot even is. So a little definition I pulled off of the internet yesterday is a chatbot is a piece of software designed to simulate human conversation, and they are often powered by artificial intelligence and machine learning. So the way I like to think of it is it's a program that interacts with the user through conversation, whether that's via texting in a social messaging app or speaking to a virtual assistant like Alexa or Siri. And I'll cover the modalities of these bots and how they present themselves in just a bit. So I'd like to start off with this great quote from Clay Christensen. The next big thing starts out being dismissed as a toy. And I know some of you might be thinking, I've been hearing a ton of hype about these bots for over the past 2 years now. And that is true. When Facebook and others first announced the addition of bots to their platforms in 2016, there was a ton of hype surrounding them. And as always, I think that when there's that much hype and then the early chatbot experiences don't quite match that hype, you can end up with some poor user experiences. And Gartner uses this great hype cycle, as they call it, and some of you may be familiar with it. And the way that it really begins is that oftentimes there's a trigger at the beginning, right? So in this case, it was natural language processing meeting artificial intelligence, and then all of the social messaging apps taking off. And so then you kind of heard all of this hype, right? Like the bots are taking over, mobile apps are dead, no one's going to use your website anymore. And then, of course, people started interacting with these early bots, and they realized that they were kind of frustrating and that they didn't do everything that all the hype had happened. And so you sort of move off of the peak of inflated expectations down into the trough of disillusionment. I like to think that we're slowly moving our way up the slope of enlightenment onto the plateau of productivity, meaning that we're seeing better and better use cases evolving, and we're seeing industries really start to harness the power of chatbots. I think this is probably a combination of both. The tools are getting a lot better, but really I think it's that the tools are starting to get in the hands of user experience designers and companies that are really thinking of creative ways to use these bots. So what kicked off the hype in the first place? Well, the rise of social media messaging alone was a big one. So back in 2016, the big four messaging apps, Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, WeChat, and Viber, surpass the big four social media apps, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat, in global monthly active users. And for those of you on the phone that might be marketers, you know this is a really big shift, right? Because for probably the past 10 or 12 years now, we've just been talking about social, social, social. And suddenly, the eyeballs were moving a little bit away from social and increasingly into the messaging apps. As I mentioned, the messaging platforms opened up their ability to add bots, and people sure did. So as of last year, Facebook announced at their F8 conference that they had over 100,000 bots added to Facebook Messenger. I'm really eager to hear this year how much that number has jumped, and I think we'll probably find out in just the next few weeks. Adoption is also really up. So according to BI Intelligence, roughly 60% of millennials or Gen Xers have engaged with a chatbot. And the predictions are starting to roll in. BI Intelligence predicts billions in annual savings. So here are just some examples across a couple of industries. So they target insurance sales representatives, financial services, obviously just helping sales reps, but where you see one of the areas where they see the largest potential annual savings is in this idea of customer service, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. There's also this idea that the bots aren't just there to help businesses communicate with their consumers, but also by using bots to help augment their own staff. So this study is a couple of years old now, but McKinsey found that the average employee spends about 1.8 hours a day just searching for information, right? So that information isn't readily available at their fingertips. And what this causes is it's sort of the equivalent of hiring 5 people, and one of them, all they do all day long is search for information. And so there's also a great opportunity here for the bots to help solve that problem by making the information more readily available for your employees within your organization. So where do the bots live? So as I just mentioned, they actually can live in business software like Slack, for example. If you're familiar with Slack, it's one of the fastest growing business tools out there today. It enables bots. But today I kind of wanted to focus more on the consumer side of the fence. So along the top here, you see things like the web, the iOS apps, Android apps. You can inject bots inside of these experiences. And then, of course, there's these messaging apps. So even simple SMS, aka text messaging on your phone, can be bot-enabled. Facebook Messenger is probably the biggest one in the US. And then, of course, there's the voice platforms, too. So these ones along the top, you have a lot of control because you can control the user experience from end to end, meaning that the actual chat interfaces themselves can be completely branded. They can be designed by you to match your company. They can sit behind your firewall, behind your paywall, so to speak, so that your users can be authenticated. That might allow them to do richer interactions than you might want to allow them to do in a tool such as Facebook Messenger. However, on the other end of the spectrum, these tools like Facebook Messenger, for example, which a lot of the examples I'm going to show you today are from there, your customers are already there, right? There's 500 million users already using Facebook Messenger. And so it really makes a lot of sense for them to just engage with your brand or with your company through a bot there rather than needing them to download yet another app. And they've made it really easy to build these bots. So what I wanted to do is just show you a couple of examples. The first one I wanted to show you is in retail, and the natural opportunity here is personalization, right? Chatbots don't just have to be for support. So Levi's, for example, has created this virtual stylist to help customers discover products. So I'm just going to start the little video here to kind of show you. So when users come in, they click the Get Started button, and they're immediately introduced to the bot. And there's a couple of these cool UI elements that I'm going to explain to you as we move through here. But one of the first ones you're going to see is a carousel. And what the bot's asking me is to sort of build a profile of what type of jeans I like. So do I want a roomier fit or do I like a tight fit? And then maybe I say fitted. So from here I can narrow it down to straight or wide. And then it's basically going to show me some results where I can now see more like this particular result. I can see it styled on models. And so it's a great way for me to discover products, but I think this is also a great way for you to learn about your user and to build profile information. This information could be funneled back to a CRM, for example, so that when you do future targeting, you can be very specific in the types of products that you offer your users. So I think there's an awful lot of opportunity here in retail, and this is an area where you see a ton of bots. So if you were to go into Facebook Messenger, if you go to the bot section there, you'll see that there's a lot of big brands who are already using this. Travel is another one that I think there's just tons of opportunities, and we built a little demo here for our existing and our potential clients that work in the travel industry. And so again, I'll point out a couple of these UI elements. So when the bot first comes in, we could ask a natural language question, but we really find that giving them these structured messages in the form of these carousels really makes it easy for the user to navigate and to know the bot's capabilities. So we're going to talk a little bit about that when I get to design. So here you see I'm trying to find maybe a flight. So I have a couple options. I could have searched by destination. Maybe I want to find some low fares. And then it asks me where I want to fly from. So maybe I'm going from Calgary to Toronto. And you can see how quickly I'm able to navigate through this rather than typing long messages into the bot and hoping that it understands my responses. By using these structured messages, you can really get to the core of the user's intention. Another cool thing about natural language processing is here you see it asks me when I want to leave or when I want to return, and I was able to just type in like next Wednesday or next Friday, or I could type 01/02/0/2020 or whatever, you know. And the bot can basically understand that. So rather than popping those old calendar interfaces up on the screen, you can just allow the user to answer in sort of natural language. We're also seeing really cool things in hospitality at, say, hotels. So, you know, for example, maybe instead of calling down to the front office to get more towels and maybe not getting an answer or pestering the busy clerk who's checking folks in, you could use a bot to do that. We've even seen some really cool examples where you can ask sort of a concierge bot, you know, where's a great place for me to grab some sushi right near my hotel. Another area that we think bots are really taking off in, and we've got some experience here, is in banking. So we're a proud partner of a bank startup called Varo. Varo sort of targets millennials. They're a non-brick and mortar bank. And they've built this really cool bot inside of their experience. So this is an example of where the bot can live inside of your actual application. In this case, it's an iOS app. And this bot's name is Val. And Val's job is to help you set goals financially, but to also help you monitor maybe some of your spending habits. So here you'll notice that Val points out to me that I've been spending a lot of money on apparel this month. And am I expecting to spend more money than that or less money than that so that I can help set up a goal? Well, a great example I like to use is that maybe I'm setting a goal to purchase a car, and Val tells me that I've been spending way too much money on lattes every day at Starbucks. So if I were to maybe cut back a little bit on those lattes, I could meet my goal of being able to pay for my car. So you can see a lot of opportunities here to engineer behavior. I think if you do anything along the lines of fitness, banking, I think there's a lot of great opportunities there. The next example is the one that I said that is most near and dear to my heart, which is education. This is actually what really got me excited about bots when I joined Robots and Pencils and started learning about them over 2 years ago, was I really immediately saw the application for educational use cases. And I think these use cases also transfer very easily over into, say, human resources, because those of you probably know, if you've been to college or if your kids are going through this experience right now, there's tons of rigmarole to beginning class, right? And sort of getting students to do the things that they need to do to begin school. So the couple of quick examples I have here is, you know, imagine being able to greet every single student. So, you know, congratulations on your acceptance to college. You can do these fun animated GIFs where we're kind of throwing the confetti in our faces. And, you know, we can introduce the chatbot. We can ask the student if we're able to reach out to them in the future, so that we can sort of nudge them along. And that's the next example I have. Again, if you have college-age kids, or if you yourself went to college recently, you know how difficult it is to get through all of the various financial aid processes. It could be the same with onboarding at your new job, right? Through HR, we need you to fill out a bunch of forms. Maybe we need to do some background checks. It's time to fill out for your 401k. And the bot can do a really great job of not only giving you context and materials that relate to the processes that you're moving through, but that they can actually nudge you along too. So a great example here is the idea of it just kind of saying like, hey Ryan, you got a minute? You know, it's time to begin your orientation course. And if we're using artificial intelligence behind the scenes, we can even put together a strategy of maybe if there's 5 or 6 different things that we need you to do, what are the top 1 or 2 things that really move the dial or the most important, so we can really work to try to determine how best to move your student or your employee through a particular process. And then, of course, there's customer service, right? And there's a couple of fun stats here. So 67% of consumers worldwide have used a chatbot for support, and support is definitely an area where this is really taking off. This next stat my wife doesn't like too much, but by 2020, the average person will have more conversations with bots than their spouse. That's according to Gartner. That's one of their predictions. And chatbots will be responsible for over $8 billion in annual cost savings by 2022, which is up from just $20 million last year, right? Now, one example that I'll point you to in the wild, I'm sure probably everybody on the phone has used Amazon at one point or another, but if you haven't checked out their chatbot, if you haven't had an opportunity to interact with their support, it's actually pretty cool. So, you've got the option to call us or to chat with us, and immediately you're talking to a bot. And so it knows what my last purchase was. It asks me if I need help with that. Maybe I say something else. And then it can bring up an entire list of all of the previous things that I've purchased. And maybe I have a question about my Fire Stick that I bought. So, it gives me a couple of these quick carousel questions where I can say, oh, was it damaged, or do I want to look into price matching, or whatever it might be. But this is a great example of where the bot is able to collect a certain amount of information about me in sort of a triage, and then, if need be, pass me off to a human. And we think this is an exceptional use case for bots, right? Because if your users, if your support folks are constantly answering the same low-hanging fruit questions over and over again, there's an awful lot of waste there. And we think this is a great opportunity to sort of augment that staff and make their on-phone or on-chat time with your customers more valuable. And the bot can collect this information and say in certain scenarios, maybe it might even pass the user off directly to a tier 2 support person, so that you're not even wasting the time of a tier 1 support person. And we see a lot of really great use cases like this out in the wild. So the next part I'd like to talk a little bit about is chatbot design and strategy. So this is some of the bot lessons that we've learned. If you look at the little chart here over on the left-hand side, we're kind of looking at the user experience, and we're taking it from what we have found to be somewhat of a negative experience up to a more positive experience, and then at the bottom thinking about the data that we're able to collect and how usable is that data on one end or unusable, and then how valuable it can get. So what we found is that the least usable data and the most negative user experience is kind of these purely open-ended conversations. And I think that this is where, the hype started to break apart when the chatbots first hit the scene in 2016, is that they relied very heavily on natural language processing alone. And any of you who've ever used Siri or Alexa or Google Home knows how often these bots can kind of fall on their faces and not have the appropriate answer. Or if you haven't been trained the right way to ask a query, it doesn't know how to respond. So if the big companies like Amazon and Google and Apple haven't quite figured that out yet, it's probably safe to assume that a lot of the other organizations haven't either. So again, we really recommend this idea of using multimedia responses. That's not to say that we wouldn't use natural language processing as well. Ideally, you're using the two together. A great example that I like to use is, say, ordering a coffee. You could have a structured message where you're taking this user through the coffee ordering process by first asking them, well, what would you like? Well, I want an Americano. What size, large, medium, or small, medium? What additives do you want? I want, milk and sugars. Ideally, though, you would be able to have a natural language processing that would allow the user to just type in, I want an Americano medium black, right? But if you think about how many slots you need to fill in that case, how many different variables there are, you have to have pretty clever NLP built there so that the bot's able to understand what their user's intention was, understand what pieces of information are missing from that so that they can ask follow-up questions. And then ideally, you also want to give the user a means of sort of moving backwards in case they change their mind. Maybe they decide they don't want it black, they do want to add sugar, for example. So again, this is where we really believe in these multimedia responses and natural language processing working in concert together. We believe in being very upfront about your capabilities. We find that the success factor goes way up. So in a lot of the examples I showed you, the multimedia structured messaging kind of gives you pathways. Hey, here's, do you want to book a flight? Or do you want to check in for your flight? Or do you want to speak to customer support? That's a really great opening triage because we can better understand the user's intention. We really believe in being either really, really smart, right? So be on that sort of Siri, Alexa side of the fence, or be apologetically dumb. If the bot kind of responds, I'm just a simple bot, and I'm sorry, I didn't understand, but here's some options. So rather than just falling on its face and saying, I'm sorry, I don't understand you, but then trying to drive them through a structured message funnel, we think that you'll have much higher success. So where we really feel like we get the most positive user experience and the most valuable data, again, is by using these sort of prompt buttons. Again, those of you who have been in marketing, you understand sort of funnels, right? And having these book-ended conversations make a lot more sense than being purely open-ended. So this idea, again, that if I'm ordering coffee, that's a very specific book-ended conversation that has some very unique goals inside of it that the user wants to accomplish. And we can train the NLP around that book-ended conversation much better than we can if we just sort of say, open-ended, how can I help you today? And they might type in something like, what's the meaning of life? And, whether or not we have an answer for that program could determine whether or not the user wants to come back and play with the bot. And then we also really buy into this idea of an ever-present escape hatch is what we like to call it here at Robots and Pencils. And this is the idea that if the user doesn't want to interact with the bot, if they want to speak to a human, then there should be an easy way to do that. And there can be a tremendous amount of cost savings. I've read stats as high as 33% cost savings just from allowing the bot, allowing the user to say, call me, rather than having the user sit in queue waiting for our next customer support. So this can also cross the boundaries of not just chat, but it can be an opportunity for your customers to get support and have it proactively reach back out to them. So here's some 10 principles of personal chatbots. These are things that we really believe will help make your bot appear a lot friendlier and add some personality to it, right? So one of the first things we really believe in is that the bot should be polite, right? The bot should never make the user feel as though they're wrong. So again, if the bot's ignorant, it should be apologetic about it. It should say, I'm sorry, it's my fault. I didn't understand you. Here's a couple of options to maybe make that, to help correct course. It should be really intuitive, right? My conversation with the chatbot should never feel confusing. So again, I think this is where the structured messages can really help because they can better understand sort of the path that they're able to go through. The bot should empower the user. So communicate preferences and choices wherever you can. If you can, have the bot flatter the user, right? Everybody loves a little flattery. Oh, great choice, awesome sauce. I can't wait to help you, through this journey, whatever it might be, really make them feel happy. The bot should feel as though it's on their team. If you're trying to employ a bot and all it's doing is doing an upsell or trying to get someone to fill out a newsletter, and I'm not saying that you can't work those things into your bot. It's just that if that's your sole purpose of the bot is to drive the user's behavior to accomplish your goal and not their goal, there is a likelihood that the user's not going to come back, right? The bot should always reflect back on the current state, and whenever possible, add a little bit of personality to help the user and the bot sort of feeling match and align. Number 7, cultivating curiosity is a fun one. So we've worked with a lot of behavioral economics folks, and they often tell us that those cheesy like "what friend are you" headlines, clickbait, so to speak, that you see, right? They actually do work. Like I'll even catch myself, I even know better, right? And every once in a while you'll just catch yourself clicking on something and then you kind of go, oh no. So we're not saying make everything clickbaity, but what those folks are doing, what's working there, the behavioral economics that work, is this idea that cultivating your curiosity and sort of driving you to want to move forward. And as often as possible, if you can have your bot do that, that's great. We love humor. So if the bot can tell a funny little joke, like say, for example, when maybe there's a long transaction that's happening in the back end, right? So your API is doing whatever it needs to do to go gather this information. Maybe the bot can tell a little joke or do something punny or show a little bit of playfulness so that the user feels more engaged with it. And then obviously the bot should be actionable. So, making it handle the goals, again, just make sure that it's useful to the user, that it's actionable. And then ultimately, number 10, trustworthiness, kind of falls back again to that number 5, right? It's on your team. Did it deliver what it said it was going to? It didn't try to trick you into something. It really was somebody that they can kind of trust. So here's a little bit of an understanding of how you might begin the process of developing your bot. So of course, like anything, you start with a big discovery sessions, right? We want to understand the business needs. We want to understand what your customers' needs are, where there's a market opportunity, and then, maybe the current state of your technology and the current state of your branding, and then kind of try to find where all those things align, because we're really trying to find a great place to sort of start a project. Next, we would move into this strategy, which is where you kind of get into some fun things. So of course, there's the business requirements, but the one that I think is the most fun is this idea of starting to begin to think about what the bot context and tone is, right? And this can be tricky because a lot of us as marketers and designers have really been thinking visually about our brand. So if you look at our style guides, right, they're often a series of colors and fonts and imagery that relates to our brand messaging. And now we really have to think about, well, how would our brand talk to somebody? What kind of personality does it have? Is it sort of a coach who's there to sort of prod you and push you along and maybe even, kind of get at you a little bit to do more exercise or to get that schoolwork done? Or is it like your best friend, your closest confidant, somebody who knows all of your dirty secrets? Or is it the person that you just met on the plane ride next to you, who you've just introduced yourself to and you're interested in learning a little bit more about them and maybe telling them a little bit about yourself? So I think this is really key. And I think it's a kind of a new paradigm that businesses have to start thinking about, like who are the right people to put in the room to think through those type of strategies. And of course, this turns into things like strategic briefs and technical approaches. Of course, we have to look at, say, what type of technology do you have available right now that we can apply to the bot? And then we kind of get into the fun stuff, right? We start this conversational architecture, and again, thinking about, okay, what are our users' goals? What are some structured message pathways that can help the user obtain those goals? What are some NLP ways of also helping that user obtain that goal, so that if they don't want to go through a structured messaging and they ask us questions or they put in queries, how can we respond to them? And then we move into this visual and motion design. And I know I kind of breezed through those use cases pretty quickly, but I'm hoping that you saw how powerful the UI elements that are inside of these messaging apps can be. So there's still an awful lot of thought that needs to be put into, like, what visuals are you going to use? Is there video? Is there audio? Are you using animated GIFs? And then, of course, there's the actual development of the bot and then user testing. And we want that to be really iterative pre-launch, but then even after we launch, we also want to be highly iterative, right? Because we're probably not going to get it 100% right the first time. So that's one of the beauties of the bot, is because they're always conversations. This isn't like a massive redesign every time. This isn't like completely changing the information architecture on your website. We're able to just go in and do some quick testing and optimization. And then maybe we find out that, oh, the users are asking all different ways to order a coffee than we ever imagined whenever we did all of our strategy sessions. So now we can go through a heavy phase of doing lots of natural language processing, training, to make that better and better and better every time. And then, of course, capability expansion, right? What are some of the other things that you would like to allow your user to do along the way? What other technology aligns with that you might already have readily available that we can incorporate into the bot so that we can expand its capabilities over time? So quickly, how do we get started, right? We really believe in the idea of, crawling before you walk, before you run. So we really love this idea of starting with an experiment. Limit your scope to avoid boiling the ocean, but ensure that it's meaningful. Right? So if you already have chatters who are chatting in a customer support scenario, I think that's a great place to start, right? There's a lot of low-hanging fruit. There's a lot of existing data. We can look at your call logs. We can look at your call volume. We can better understand what's moving through the pipes and where we can kind of push the levers to increase and optimize where a bot could fit into that. If you want to go large scale, that's great. And I think that if you've got the technology already aligned and ready to do that, but I would still recommend that we go with, say, 1 or 2 or 3 features that are really relevant to the user, get those out there, test them, learn from them, get feedback from your users before you maybe go out with a massive large-scale bot. Here's an illustrative chatbot rollout schedule, right? So again, we really love this idea of the first phase being focused on sort of launching and learning, define your use case and your campaigns, start to come up with this bot context, build the initial conversations, do some data capture all along the way. And then at the next phase, maybe add some scale, right? So now we're maybe opening up to a larger group of users, we're adding in additional features, and again, we're learning all along the way. And then ultimately, phase 3 through phase of 100 is just this expansion of capabilities, right? The bot continuously gets smarter, the bot continuously adds more features along the way. So making the cases can be tricky, right? Because obviously, everyone here on the phone maybe has a different use case in mind. And I know I keep coming back to customer support primarily just because, again, it's really kind of the easiest one to talk about. We at Robots and Pencils would love to talk to you about whatever unique use case you might have and how you might be able to prove out the ROI on it. But let's use the customer service one as an example. So step 1, you would calculate the number of reps that you already have handling peak time interactions by channel, right? And this is everything from phone calls to people filling out support tickets on your web to people who are chatting with your chatters. And then the next step that you would want to do is start to predict the number of interactions that the bot can initiate instead of that live agent, right? So maybe out of the gate you say, well, maybe we're not going to move the phone call dial very much. Maybe we might only get a 2 or 3% lift off of that. But we do have all these chatters, and 85% of the time they're answering the same 5 or 6 questions. So maybe you get a 30 or 40% lift out of that. And then once you understand that, it's basically a simple math, right? Compare the total cost of ownership against the cost savings over time.
With that, I just want to thank Ryan for sharing this valuable information with our attendees today. And thanks to everybody for attending the webinar. Your feedback is very important to us, so we ask that you complete a brief survey, which will be sent to you shortly. If you enjoyed today's webinar, be sure to join us on May 23rd for Ask a Video Producer, Pro Tips for Great Productions by Chris Carroll of Cinecraft Productions. That concludes our session. Thank you again, and have a great day, everyone.